What's going on, everybody? My name is Ty, and today we're going to be discussing the best camera settings into getting that movie look. So you guys may be wondering, what is a movie look? If I was to give it a definition, it's how we train our eyes into identifying what's pleasing to us via camera settings. So the aperture, the shutter speed, the frame rate, all of these things are important when we're trying to get the movie look. And the movie industry has mastered these settings. If you just got a brand new camera and you're ready to start shooting, you might want to watch this video. All right, y'all. So I'm on a Canon T7i. If you don't have a Canon T7i, most of the EOS Canon cameras pretty much have the same layout as far as settings. So you may have to do a little extra work to find these settings, but nevertheless, these settings are very important. First things first, we're in the menu right now. So we hit OK, and our movie size. The standard movie size for motion picture is at 24 frames per second, but the closest we can get is here at the 23.98 frames per second. There's really no difference. I really don't mess with any other settings besides full HD at 59.94 frames per second. So this is equivalent to 60 frames per second. So the two I usually play around with is the first one, which is usually for my B-roll, or if I want to shoot anything in slow motion, I set my frame rate to 59.94, which is equivalent to 60 frames per second. Or if I'm just doing standard video work, at 23.98, which is closest to 24 frames per second. So we're gonna just hit 23.98 right here. Now we have our frame size. The sound recording, really don't worry about that too much. Lens, really don't have to worry about these three too much. So let's just move on to the next page. We have our ISO speed. I have my ISO set at a maximum of 6400. The more ISO you have in your picture, the more film grain you have. I hate film grain. I'm really not a big fan of film grain. Later we will be discussing ISO speed and how this affects our video and picture as a whole. So picture style, we want to be neutral. Neutral is the safest zone for your picture style. You're able to do a lot more in post and without too much of a hassle of playing around with the settings in your camera. So we set that to neutral. White balance, we have daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten, white fluorescent, and flash. But usually you want to either have a custom white balance or you just set your white balance right before you shoot. See, here's the space for the custom white balance. And the white balance correction, I keep that at a 0. It's more for me to play around and post. So I usually have my 3x3 grid on while I'm shooting to help me with my composition. One thing I like about this Canon series is the tracking methods. We have facial tracking, facial recognition, and we have different points of focus. All these other settings really don't have to worry about, but the main thing is to set in that frame rate, and we're gonna play around a little bit with our aperture, ISO, and our shutter speed. So when we're talking about ISO, the ISO is the sensitivity of the camera sensor when it's in contact with light. So usually you want to keep this at the lowest setting possible. So if your scene is bright, you want to stick around either 100 or 200. With darker scenes, you want to stick around 800 or more, depending on if you want film grain or not. So in other words, if you're outside, make sure it's around 100, and if you're inside, make sure it's around 800. So moving on to shutter speed. Shutter speed is the length of time when the sensor is exposed to the light. So the shutter opens up and it closes. So the longer the shutter is open, the more light passes through to the sensor. So the shutter speed affects the motion blur. And the closest motion blur we see out of our eyes is at 1/48th of a second. Which brings us back to our frame rate. If we have a frame rate at 24 frames per second, our shutter speed must be at 1/48th of a second in order to get that natural motion blur we see. This is called the 180-degree rule. It's when the shutter speed must be double your frame rate. The aperture is the amount of light that travels through your lens before it hits the sensor. The aperture is basically a hole that opens and closes within your lens. The smaller the number, the bigger the hole opens up. This also determines how much background blur will be in your video. Quick note, shots with wide apertures should be planned out carefully because you're forcing your viewers what to look at and you're separating the subject from the rest of the information in the picture. And you want to have your camera settings in manual mode. This gives us a lot more to play around with, and we're able to have the conscious decision to make sure we have a perfectly lit scene, and we're able to do more in post. Whatever it takes to get the shot, whatever it takes to get the look you want, go for it. So I hope this video helps you guys out a lot. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, tell your mama, tell your pappy. But on a serious note, hope you guys out there staying safe, and till next time.